My husband thought he was brilliant when he planted a federal offense in my carry-on bag just hours before our flight. So I secretly swapped the bags and let his 24-year-old secretary take the fall instead. When armed security pulled $3 million in stolen bearer bonds out of her pink designer luggage, my husband completely lost his mind right there at the checkpoint. But watching his perfectly crafted reality crumble was just the appetizer. I had no idea my own family would try to protect him, or that I was about to destroy their high society empire before our flight even boarded. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to people who drastically underestimated your intelligence. Do not look at me. I have no idea what that is. That is her bag. I swear it belongs to my wife. Julian said. His voice cracked with a pathetic panic as he took a dramatic step backward, pointing a trembling finger directly at my chest. We stood at the premier security checkpoint in Hartsfield-Jackson Airport. 4 federal agents had us completely surrounded, their hands resting cautiously near their holsters. The fluorescent terminal lights beat down on us, illuminating the sweat pooling on Julian's forehead. He was a financial officer used to commanding boardrooms, yet here he was playing the terrified innocent husband perfectly, or so he thought. Beside him stood Chloe, his 24-year-old secretary. She clutched her iced coffee, playing the oblivious bystander. I simply stood there, arms crossed, unfazed by the federal agents boxing us in. My name is Maya. I am 33 years old, and my Atlanta family treated me like a disappointment because I preferred coding over cotillions. Today, they were going to learn what happens when you corner a woman who writes the rules. "Madam, step back," the lead agent commanded, unzipping the suspicious duffel bag. Julian held his breath, waiting for the reveal that would send me to federal prison. He expected them to pull the contraband out of my carry-on. Instead, the agent yanked open a bright pink designer suitcase. Chloe pink bag. Chloe dropped her iced coffee. It shattered across the floor. The agent pulled out thick stacks of crisp bearer bonds. $3 million worth to be exact. Right beneath them sat a heavily encrypted solid-state drive, a drive containing data you do not want the federal government finding if you are a very corrupt executive. "What is that?" Chloe shrieked. "Julian, tell them I do not know what that is. That is not mine." Julian froze. His mask of victimhood shattered instantly. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost in a custom suit. He stared at the pink suitcase, then stared at my black one sitting on the inspection table, completely clean. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The bags had been swapped. "Sir, step back and keep your hands where I can see them." Another agent ordered, moving toward Chloe with handcuffs unclipped from his belt. "Wait. No." Julian stammered, his corporate vocabulary completely vanishing. "There has been a mistake." "That bag. I mean, those items do not belong in there. She is just my secretary." "They certainly do not belong in my bag, darling," I said, my voice perfectly calm. I stepped closer to him, ignoring the chaos as an agent read Chloe her rights. She was sobbing hysterically, begging Julian to do something. I leaned in so only he could hear my next words. "You really thought those new motion sensors I installed in my closet were just for lighting?" I whispered, watching his eyes widen in pure terror. "I watched you sneak in at 2 in the morning. Julian, I watched you zip that federal crime into my luggage while I was pretending to be asleep. Did you really think you could frame me for your massive embezzlement and walk away clean with your little side piece?" Julian swallowed hard. He was trapped, cornered by his own sloppy arrogance. For 5 years, he treated my career in cybersecurity as a cute little hobby. He thought I was just a naive tech geek who could easily be pushed around. "Maya, please." He choked out, his voice barely a whisper. "We can fix this. You do not understand what is at stake here." "Oh, I understand exactly what is at stake," I replied, stepping back. "Federal wire fraud, grand larceny, and money laundering. It looks like your secretary is going to need a good defense attorney." Chloe was screaming now as the agents marched her away toward a private room. People in the security line were openly staring phones out, recording the spectacular downfall of a high society executive mistress. Julian raised his hands, which shook as he reached into his pocket, pulling out his phone. "I need to call my legal team," he muttered, his fingers fumbling over the screen. "I need to call Trent. We need to handle this right now before the market opens." "I would not bother calling Trent," I said, a satisfied smile spreading across my face. I pointed past the security checkpoint toward the frosted glass doors of the airport-exclusive VIP lounge. "Because he is already here. And he brought an audience." Julian turned his head, following my gaze. Marching directly toward us through the terminal concourse was my toxic family. My mother, Eleanor, looking pristine and furious in her Sunday church suit. My father, Thomas, the megachurch bishop, his face stormy with righteous indignation. Following closely behind them was my older sister, Vanessa, the former pageant queen clutching the arm of her wealthy white husband, Trent. Trent was Julian's former colleague at the financial firm and the architect of the embezzlement scheme that was right there in front of us all now. The frosted glass doors of the VIP lounge slammed shut behind us, cutting off the stares of the terminal crowd. The private conference room smelled of expensive espresso and desperation. Julian immediately collapsed into a leather armchair, burying his face in his hands. He looked like a martyr playing his role to perfection. My mother, Eleanor, did not even ask what happened at the security checkpoint. She marched straight toward me, her designer heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. Her perfectly manicured finger jabbed the air inches from my face. "What is wrong with you, Maya?" She hissed, her voice a harsh whisper designed to keep church gossip at bay. "We are supposed to be boarding a flight to Cabo for your sister anniversary, and instead, I am watching you cause a federal scene. Do you have any idea who was in that security line?" Deacon Hughes was 3 people behind us. I crossed my arms, keeping my posture rigid. Julian tried to smuggle $3 million of stolen bearer bonds onto a federal flight, I stated clearly. He planted them in my suitcase to frame me. I simply redirected his little gift to his mistress. My mother let out a sharp scoff, waving her hand as if swatting away a fly. "I do not want to hear your paranoid delusions," she snapped. "Julian is a senior financial officer. He provides for you. He put a roof over your head when your little computer hobby was making pennies. You should be on your knees thanking God a man of his stature even looked your way." My father, Bishop Thomas, stood near the window, adjusting his custom silk tie. His pastoral calm was entirely reserved for his congregation. Here in private, his disappointment in me was palpable. "Your mother is right, Maya," he rumbled, his baritone voice echoing off the glass walls. "You have always been prone to these dramatic outbursts. You refuse to attend service, you reject our community, and now you are publicly attempting to destroy a good man reputation. We have an image to uphold. The church is breaking ground on the new Family Life Center next month. We cannot have the lead pastor daughter embroiled in a federal criminal investigation." I stared at the man who was supposed to protect me. "You are more worried about a building fund than the fact that my husband just tried to send me to federal prison," I asked, my voice dangerously steady. Vanessa stepped forward, her perfectly styled hair catching the lounge lighting. She possessed the exact kind of flawless beauty our parents worshipped. Always playing the victim, she sneered, looking me up and down with pure disgust. "You have been jealous of Julian's success since the day you met him. Just because you refused to pledge Alpha Kappa Alpha and decided to hide behind computer screens instead of building a real network like a normal person does not give you the right to ruin his life." I looked at my sister, the former pageant queen, the Spelman graduate, the golden child who could do no wrong. She had spent her entire life stepping on my neck to elevate herself. "You literally saw his secretary get arrested with the stolen money, Vanessa," I pointed out. "Are you deliberately ignoring the fact that your perfect brother-in-law brought his mistress on a family vacation?" Vanessa rolled her eyes, crossing her arms. "Men have stress, Maya," she said with absolute conviction. "Julian works 80 hours a week managing billion-dollar portfolios for Trent Firm. If he needed a little distraction on a business trip, it is because you are incapable of supporting a high-value man. Maybe if you spent less time coding in your basement and more time maintaining your marriage, he would not need a secretary to keep him company. My mother nodded in vigorous agreement. Vanessa understands how the real world works, Eleanor added. She understands sacrifice. You have always been selfish, Maya. From the day you dropped out of the church choir to learn programming, you have been a constant source of embarrassment. Julian is the best thing that ever happened to you. We are not going to let your bitter jealousy destroy his career. Julian peeked through his fingers, realizing he had the entire room firmly on his side. He let out a theatrical sigh, looking up at my father with tear-filled eyes. Thomas, I swear I have no idea what she is talking about. He lied, his voice trembling with manufactured grief. I think Maya is having a mental breakdown. I found out yesterday she has been secretly hacking my emails. She planted those bonds in Chloe's bag to ruin me because I asked for a divorce last night. It was a masterful performance. My parents looked at him with profound sympathy. My mother actually walked over and placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. We know Julian Eleanor cooed. We know how difficult she is. We will fix this. I laughed, a cold, sharp sound that startled all of them. You are going to fix a federal crime, I asked, looking directly at my mother. The TSA has the bonds. The FBI is literally downstairs interviewing his mistress right now. There is no fixing this with a quiet church donation or a PR spin. That was when Trent finally spoke. He had been standing silently near the complimentary bar, swirling a glass of sparkling water. Trent was a third-generation investment banker from an old-money Buckhead family. He viewed my family as useful pawns and viewed me as absolute trash. He set his glass down with a sharp clink and walked toward me. He stopped mere inches away, using his height to try and intimidate me. His pale blue eyes were devoid of any warmth. You listen to me very carefully, Maya. Trent said, his tone low and menacing. Julian is the point man on a massive corporate merger my firm is executing next week. We are talking about an $800 million deal. If Julian goes down for embezzlement or fraud, the SEC will freeze the entire transaction. My family stands to lose tens of millions of dollars in commissions and equity. I am not going to let your little temper tantrum jeopardize my wealth. I held his gaze, refusing to back away. And how exactly do you plan to stop the federal government, Trent? He leaned in closer, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. I do not have to stop the government. I just have to stop you. You are going to walk out of this lounge, go straight to those federal agents, and tell them you stole the bonds. You are going to sign a full confession stating that you suffered a psychiatric break and framed Julian's secretary out of jealousy. I stared at him in genuine disbelief. You want me to take the fall for a federal crime to save your merger? Trent adjusted his expensive cuffs. I am not asking you, Maya. I am telling you. If you do not walk out there right now and take the blame, I will make a single phone call to my board of directors. I will have your little IT hobby of a company blacklisted from every corporate contract in North America. I will freeze your business accounts, and I will personally ensure you are bankrupted and homeless by Friday morning. Take the fall for the bag or lose everything you have ever built. The choice is yours. I looked from Trent's perfectly tailored Tom Ford suit to his smug, entitled face. He stood there expecting me to crumble just like everyone else in this family always expected. For my entire life, I had been the designated shock absorber for their mistakes. I was supposed to bow my head, take the blame, and apologize for inconveniencing their pristine lives. Not today. I adjusted the strap of my laptop bag on my shoulder and let out a slow, deliberate laugh. The sound seemed to bounce off the expensive acoustic paneling of the VIP lounge, drawing brief glances from the bartender across the room. You honestly think I'm going to confess to federal wire fraud to save a man who was sleeping with a girl 10 years younger than him? I asked, stepping right into Trent's personal space. You think I'm going to throw away my life so you can push through a corporate merger? Trent did not flinch. He just looked down his nose at me with that signature Buckhead elite arrogance. It is not a request, Maya. It is damage control. You are a liability. Julian is an asset. My father stepped up beside Trent, adjusting his clerical collar. The gold cross on his chest gleamed under the recessed lighting. Maya, listen to your brother-in-law. Trent understands how these things work at the highest levels. The Lord calls us to sacrifice for the greater good of the family. A temporary setback for you means Julian can continue providing. We will hire the best defense lawyers in the state. You will probably just get probation or a few months in a minimum security facility. I stared at the man who used to preach about truth and justice every Sunday morning to thousands of devoted followers. You want me to take a felony charge so your son-in-law can keep paying your country club dues, Dad? That is a new low even for you. Vanessa scoffed, crossing her arms over her designer dress. Stop being so intensely dramatic, Maya. You do not even have a real career to ruin. You fix computers. Julian is a chief financial officer. He actually matters to society. If he goes to prison, our entire family reputation is dragged through the mud. Trent smiled, clearly enjoying his wife's unwavering support. He pulled a sleek platinum smartphone from his breast pocket and tapped the screen with agonizing slowness. Let me break this down into terms even a community college dropout can understand, Trent said, his voice dripping with absolute condescension. My family has been on the board of every major financial institution in Atlanta for 3 generations. We fund the tech sector you play in. I have the personal cell phone numbers of every venture capitalist, every tech executive, and every corporate headhunter from Midtown to Alpharetta. He held the phone up, waving it slightly in my face. If you do not walk out of this lounge right now and tell those federal agents that the pink bag was yours, I will make exactly 3 phone calls. By noon, you will be blacklisted from every IT firm, every help desk, and every freelance platform in the state of Georgia. I will personally ensure you cannot get a job plugging in a toaster. You lack the pedigree to survive this, Maya. You have no network. You refused to join a sorority. You rejected the legacy your mother and sister built. You are a nobody from nowhere playing in a sandbox built by people like me. My mother nodded approvingly at Trent, vicious breakdown of my worth. You brought this on yourself. Eleanor added, her tone icy and completely devoid of maternal affection. If you had just supported your husband properly, he would not have been forced to find comfort elsewhere, and we would not be standing here negotiating your freedom. You have always been so utterly selfish. Julian, sensing the shift in power, stepped out from behind my mother's protective shadow. Just do it, Maya, Julian pleaded, trying to sound authoritative but failing miserably. Take the plea deal. I will make sure you are taken care of financially when you get out. We can put this all behind us and start over. I let the weight of their combined threats hang in the heavy air of the lounge. The sheer audacity of their entitlement was breathtaking. They truly believed they held all the cards. They thought my silence was surrender. Slowly, I walked over to one of the marble coffee tables in the center of the room. I unzipped my bag and pulled out my silver laptop. Vanessa rolled her eyes loudly. Are you seriously going to write a blog post about this right now, Maya? Put the computer away and go talk to the TSA before they put Julian in handcuffs. I ignored her, opening the lid and typing in my decryption password. Trent smirked, pocketing his phone. She is probably looking up public defenders online. Let her realize how much a federal trial costs before she makes her final decision. My father sighed heavily, rubbing his temples as if I were a stubborn child refusing to eat her vegetables. Lord, give me patience with this girl. Maya closed the laptop. You are embarrassing us in front of Trent. We need to handle this quietly before the press gets wind of a scandal involving the church. I connected my laptop to the VIP lounge Bluetooth audio system. The pairing chime echoed through the room, premium ceiling speakers startling a few other travelers sitting near the buffet. I did not care about them. I only cared about the 5 people standing in front of me, so convinced of their own untouchable superiority. You are right about one thing, Trent, I said, keeping my eyes locked on the screen as I pulled up an encrypted audio file. I do not have your old money pedigree. I do not have Vanessa pageant crowns or Julian corporate titles. But I do have a fundamental understanding of network security. And I know that arrogant men never bother to sweep their private offices for listening devices. Trent's smug expression faltered for a fraction of a second. What are you talking about? Julian took a nervous step forward. Maya, what is that file? I hit the space bar. The audio began to play crystal clear and amplified through the lounge high-fidelity sound system. It was Julian's voice, panicked and breathless, recorded just 3 days ago inside his downtown executive suite. Trent, the auditors are coming on Monday. They are going to find the missing funds. It is over $8 million. We cannot hide this anymore. The SEC will be involved by Tuesday morning. Then came Trent's voice, cold, calculating, and unmistakably clear. Calm down, Julian. Panic is for poor people. We have the bearer bonds. You just need to get them across the border to the Cayman accounts. Julian's recorded voice trembled. If I get caught with those bonds, I am looking at 20 years in a federal penitentiary. We need a fall guy, Trent. I cannot take this risk alone. The audio captured the sound of a heavy glass sliding across a wooden desk, followed by Trent's chilling response. That is exactly why you are going to pack the bonds in Maya luggage. She is completely clueless. While she is dealing with the TSA, we will initiate the final wire transfer. We drain her retirement accounts, funnel the cash through the church offshore shell company, and use it to balance our corporate ledgers before the audit. By the time she posts bail, we will be clean, and she will be looking at a decade in federal prison for smuggling and wire fraud. The recording echoed through the absolute dead silence of the VIP lounge. The color drained completely from Trent's face. His jaw locked, his aristocratic composure shattering into a million pieces. Julian stumbled backward, bumping into a leather sofa, gasping for air as if the oxygen had been sucked out of the room. Vanessa stared at her husband in wide-eyed horror, realizing the depth of the betrayal. My mother and father stood frozen, their mouths slightly open, stripped of their self-righteous authority. I closed my laptop with a sharp, decisive snap. It sounded like a gunshot in the silent room. Vanessa broke the paralysis first. She lunged across the marble table and slammed both of her hands down hard onto the closed lid of my laptop. Her manicured acrylic nails clicked sharply against the silver casing. She was breathing heavily, her chest heaving under her designer silk dress. "You forged that!" She shrieked, her voice echoing off the lounge walls and causing the bartender to flinch. "You are a computer hacker, Maya. You used artificial intelligence to clone their voices. You manufactured this entire ridiculous audio file just because you are obsessed with destroying my husband." Trent quickly stepped up behind his wife, placing a supportive hand on her waist. He smoothed his features into a mask of arrogant confidence, though a vein pulsed rapidly in his neck. "Listen to your sister, Maya," Trent commanded, projecting the calm authority of a man used to buying his way out of consequences. No judge in the world is going to accept a digital audio file provided by a disgruntled, unstable wife. You are facing federal charges. I have the best legal team in the state on retainer. We can bury you under a mountain of litigation so heavy, you will never see daylight again. Give me the laptop right now and I might still let you take the plea deal. I ignored Trent completely. My eyes were fixed on the two people who were supposed to protect me unconditionally. My parents stood near the frosted glass doors, completely motionless. I looked directly at my father. He was a man who preached about truth, integrity, and divine justice to 10,000 people every Sunday. His church was supposedly a beacon of morality in Atlanta. "Dad," I said, my voice steady but carrying a sharp edge. "Trent and Julian just admitted to laundering stolen bearer bonds through your church. They are using your offshore charity accounts to hide $8 million of embezzled corporate funds. Are you really going to stand there and say absolutely nothing while they try to send your daughter to federal prison?" Bishop Thomas looked down at his polished Italian leather shoes. He adjusted his collar, cleared his throat, and refused to meet my gaze. The silence from him was a physical blow heavier than any insult Vanessa had ever hurled my way. It was my mother who finally moved. Eleanor took a slow, trembling step forward. The pristine facade of the perfect First Lady was crumbling right before my eyes. Her perfectly styled hair suddenly looked rigid, and her expensive perfume smelled suffocatingly sweet in the tense air. She clutched her pearl necklace, her knuckles white. "Leave your father out of this, Maya," Eleanor said, her voice cracking. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears, But they held no warmth for me. They held only desperate self-preserving fear. He did not know the details of the financial transfers. I handled the corporate donations. A cold realization washed over me, freezing the blood in my veins. "You knew," I whispered, staring at the woman who gave birth to me. "You knew they were framing me. You knew Julian was planting stolen federal bonds in my luggage today." Eleanor let out a jagged sob, pressing a hand to her mouth. "We did not have a choice, Maya," she cried out, dropping the whisper and letting her desperation fill the room. "The church is completely bankrupt. We are $20 million in debt. The private jets, the expansion projects, the television network. It was all built on predatory loans. The bank was going to foreclose on the sanctuary next month. We were going to lose everything. The congregation, the television show, our entire legacy was going to be publicly humiliated." I stared at her in utter revulsion. "So you let your son-in-law use the church as a money laundering shell company to cover his embezzlement? Trent, family stepped in to save us," Eleanor yelled defensively, pointing a shaking finger at Trent. "Trent arranged private financing to keep the creditors away. He saved this family. He saved your father's reputation. When the auditors started closing in on Julian and Trent, they needed a way to move the corporate money quickly and cover the deficit. They needed a distraction. And I was the distraction. I stated the reality settling into my bones. You sacrificed your own daughter to federal prison to pay off your megachurch debts." Eleanor wiped a tear from her cheek, her expression hardening into something cold and calculated. "You have always been the strong one, Maya. You are resourceful. You would survive a few years in a minimum security facility. Vanessa is fragile. She needs this lifestyle. She needs the country club, the society events, the stability of Trent wealth. If Trent goes to prison, Vanessa loses everything. It was the necessary price to pay to protect the family. You are being selfish for not seeing the bigger picture." The sheer magnitude of the betrayal echoed in my mind. My mother had literally priced my freedom against my sister's social calendar and decided I was worth sacrificing. I looked at Vanessa, who was standing tall, looking entirely unapologetic. I looked at Julian, who was silently begging me to just accept my fate. I looked at Trent, who was smirking again, believing his money had just bought his way out of federal indictment. And I looked at my parents, who had sold my soul to protect a bankrupt facade. "You are right, Mom," I said, my voice dropping to a deadly calm. "I am incredibly resourceful. But you severely underestimated exactly how resourceful I can be." I reached into my blazer pocket and pulled out my phone. I unlocked the screen with a quick swipe. "Put the phone away," Maya, Trent warned, stepping forward with an aggressive posture. "Do not make this harder on yourself. You have no moves left. The TSA is waiting outside those doors." "Actually, Trent, I do not just fix computers," I replied, staring directly into his pale blue eyes. "I run the premier cybersecurity firm in the Southeast. For the past 6 months, my firm has been the lead security contractor for the exact banking institution that holds your corporate funds, your trust funds, and the church accounts." I tapped the master execution icon on my secure dashboard. It was a fail-safe protocol I had coded weeks ago when I first noticed the digital anomalies in Julian accounts. Instantly, the quiet hum of the VIP lounge was shattered. Trent's phone buzzed aggressively in his breast pocket. A second later, Vanessa's diamond-encrusted smartphone began chiming from her designer handbag. Julian's phone lit up in his hand, pinging with rapid-fire emergency alerts. "What did you just do?" Trent demanded, ripping the phone from his pocket. I smiled, feeling a profound sense of absolute liberation. "I just froze everything. Every joint account, every offshore shell company, every platinum credit card, and every corporate ledger you have access to is now locked behind military-grade encryption. You are all completely, utterly, and permanently broke." The heavy mahogany doors of my father Buckhead estate slammed shut behind me. Rain battered the stained glass windows, casting distorted shadows across the marble floors. Bishop Thomas emerged from the west wing, marching toward me with a furious stride, his pastoral calm completely abandoned. He was a cornered man, realizing his absolute control was slipping away. His face was flushed red and his immaculate suit jacket was discarded, leaving him in a wrinkled dress shirt. "You are going to fix this right now, Maya," he ordered, pointing a trembling finger at my face. He backed me into his private study. "You are going to log back into whatever unauthorized system you accessed and unfreeze every account associated with this family." "I am afraid I cannot do that, Dad," I said, my voice perfectly level. "The accounts are locked under a federal security protocol pending an official fraud investigation. I triggered the alert because your son-in-law was attempting to move $8 million of illicit funds through your charity ledgers. If those transfers had cleared, the IRS would be seizing this house." My father slammed his fist down on his massive oak desk, rattling his crystal whiskey decanter. "I do not care about your technical excuses," he bellowed. "Do you have any idea what you have done? You have paralyzed our entire operation. The payroll accounts for the church staff are frozen. The contractor funds are inaccessible. Trent cannot cover his margin calls, and Vanessa credit cards are bouncing. You have plunged this family into complete financial ruin. A petty vendetta," I repeated, feeling a cold fury settle in my chest. "Julian tried to send me to federal prison today to cover his crimes. He packed $3 million of stolen bearer bonds into my luggage. Trent helped him plan it. Vanessa cheered him on. Mom authorized it to save your building fund. And you stood there completely silent while they demanded I take the fall. You watched them try to destroy my life and did absolutely nothing." "You are exaggerating," Thomas snapped, waving his hand dismissively. "Trent assured me the lawyers would keep you out of a cell. It was a temporary measure to protect the greater good. We have a congregation of 10,000 people relying on us. The church requires sacrifice." "It is funny how that sacrifice always seems to fall on me," I said. "You never asked Vanessa to sacrifice her country club memberships. You never asked Mom to sacrifice her designer wardrobe. But you were perfectly willing to sacrifice my freedom to keep your megachurch illusion afloat." My father straightened up, inflating his chest. He looked at me not as a daughter, but as a rebellious congregant needing discipline. "I am your father and your pastor," he declared, his voice dropping into that booming register he used from the pulpit. "You are defying the natural order of this family. You are defying me. If you do not unfreeze those accounts within the next 5 minutes, I will excommunicate you from the congregation. I will stand before the church and declare you an absolute pariah." I stared at him, letting his ridiculous threat hang in the silent room. "You really think threatening to kick me out of a church I stopped attending 10 years ago gives you leverage over me?" His face tightened into a cruel sneer. "Then let us talk about something you do care about, Maya. Money." He walked around the desk, pulling a brass key from his pocket and unlocking the top drawer. "If you walk out without releasing our funds, I will call the estate lawyers tonight. I will completely disinherit you." He pulled out a thick bound document and slapped it onto the desk. "This is the family trust," he said, his voice dripping with venom. "There is over $40 million tied up in properties and the church holding company. If you do not comply, I will strike your name from every page. You will not see a single dime of the Wilson family wealth. You will spend the rest of your life watching Vanessa inherit an empire while you rot in mediocrity." I stood there listening to the rain pound against the windows. I looked at the trust document sitting on the desk, its gold-embossed cover gleaming. Then I looked up at my father, and I started to laugh. It was not a bitter laugh. It was genuine, deep amusement that bubbled up from my chest and filled the heavy air of the study. My father frowned deeply, his confidence faltering at my reaction. "What is so funny?" he demanded, taking a step back. I reached into my leather tote bag. "You are trying to threaten me with an inheritance that does not exist, Dad," I said, pulling out a heavy legal folder of my own. I tossed it onto the mahogany desk. It landed right on top of his family trust with a satisfying thud. My father stared at the plain manila folder. "What is this?" he asked, his voice suddenly lacking its boom. "That is reality," I replied, crossing my arms. "I know the church has been secretly bankrupt for 4 years. I know attendance is down 40%. I know you leveraged the sanctuary to cover the offshore losses. There is no $40 million trust fund. You are drowning in toxic debt, and your creditors were preparing to liquidate everything you own. The blood drained from his face as he stared at me. How do you know that? Because I bought it, I said, leaning forward so he could hear each syllable clearly. My little IT company. Aegis Cyber acquired a boutique financial firm last month. We specialize in distressed assets. I bought the bank that holds every single one of your defaulted loans. There is no family inheritance left to threaten me with, Thomas. I own the church. I own this mansion. And as of this very afternoon, I own you. The heavy oak doors of the mansion crashed open. Julian stood in the archway of the study, dripping wet from the storm. His silk tie was gone, revealing a man who had spent hours navigating the unpleasant reality of downtown booking. He marched straight toward us, leaving a trail of muddy water across the Persian rug. Julian, wild, bloodshot eyes locked onto me. He was breathing heavily, practically panting like a cornered animal trying to escape a trap of his own making. Maya, you have to listen to me, Julian pleaded, his voice cracking. He dropped to his knees. Chloe acted completely alone. She went rogue. I had absolutely no idea she was smuggling those bearer bonds. She stole my security credentials and forged my signature on the transfer documents. I am a victim here, Maya. I stared down at him. The sheer audacity of his lie was impressive. You are claiming your secretary orchestrated an $80 million corporate embezzlement scheme and a federal framing plot all by herself, I asked. You expect me to believe she engineered a financial conspiracy that spans 3 continents just because she had access to your calendar? Julian nodded frantically. Yes, Maya, yes. She is obsessed with me. She wanted to destroy our marriage because I told her I would never leave you. I love you, Maya. I have always loved you. You are my wife. You have to believe me. They set my bail at $500,000, and Trent Firm refused to cover it. I had to drain my emergency fund just to get out of that cell. I need my wife by my side. He slowly rose to his feet, his eyes darting toward the silver laptop resting on the edge of the desk. The same laptop I had just used to freeze Trent and Vanessa accounts. He pointed a shaking finger at the aluminum casing. I know you have the corporate logs, Maya. I know you downloaded the internal audit files when you hacked the server. I need that data. If I can just get into the system, I can prove Chloe initiated the transfers from her terminal. I can clear my name. Just let me log in and pull the raw data. Please, Maya. If you ever loved me, you will let me clear my name. I looked at his sweating face and the greedy glint in his eyes as he stared at my laptop. He did not want to prove his innocence. He wanted to wipe the drives. He wanted to delete the evidence and lock me out of the system so he could access his hidden offshore crypto wallets and flee the country. He thought I was exactly the same naive woman he had married. He thought he could manipulate my emotions with fake tears. I smiled warmly, reaching out and spinning the laptop around so the keyboard faced him. Be my guest, Julian, I said, my voice soft and encouraging. Clear your name. Julian let out a massive sigh of relief, lunging forward. His wet fingers flew across the keys, pulling up the terminal window. He was moving fast, frantic to access the root directory. He typed in his credentials, expecting to find the back door he had built into the network months ago. I stepped back, crossing my arms and watching the screen. I had known Julian would try to run. I had known he possessed a secret, decentralized crypto vault where he had been siphoning the stolen church funds. He thought his digital footprint was completely untraceable. He thought his encryption keys were safely buried in the dark web. He was wrong. Julian smashed the enter key with a triumphant smirk, expecting the server directories to populate on the screen. Instead, the screen went entirely black. A single line of neon green text appeared in the center of the monitor. Warning. Protocol initiated. Julian frowned, tapping the escape key rapidly. Maya, what is this? What did you do to the interface? I did not do anything, Julian, I replied, watching his panic return. You just did. Another line of green text populated below the first. Decrypting offshore wallets. Accessing hidden nodes. Julian's face turned chalk white. He frantically mashed the power button, trying to force a hard shutdown, but the laptop ignored the command. The hardware was completely locked out. No, no, no. He muttered, his fingers flying across the keys in a desperate attempt to abort the sequence. How did you find the wallets? Maya, stop this. You asked for access, I pointed out calmly. I gave you access. The screen flashed rapidly, cycling through thousands of lines of code. The virus I had planted deep within the root directory was executing flawlessly. It was a specialized self-destruct worm triggered by his specific keystroke login pattern. By typing his credentials, he had willingly handed over the master keys to his illicit fortune. Purging crypto assets, the screen read. Julian screamed, slamming his fists onto the desk. He grabbed the laptop, trying to rip the battery out, but the unibody casing held firm. My life savings, he shrieked. Stop it, Maya. You are destroying everything. The green text flashed one final time. Wallets successfully permanently erased. Transferring transaction logs to Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division. Message sent. The screen powered down completely. Julian dropped the laptop as if it had burned him. His knees gave out and he collapsed onto the floor, staring at the blank screen in absolute horror. Every single digital coin he had stolen was permanently obliterated into the digital void, and the federal government now possessed the exact roadmap of how he had acquired it. I leaned over the edge of the heavy mahogany desk, looking down at my newly bankrupt husband crying on the rug. Your corporate career is now entirely over, Julian. I guess Chloe forgot to tell you about the advanced firewall protocol I built into the system earlier this week, I whispered. The silence in the study was absolute, broken only by the sound of Julian weeping on the Persian rug. Trent stood frozen near the doorway, his arrogant posture completely deflated. Vanessa, however, was not frozen. She was staring violently at her diamond-encrusted smartphone, tapping the screen with increasing frantic energy. A rapid succession of red notification banners illuminated her panicked face. Apple Pay was declined. American Express Platinum suspended. Chase Centurion account locked. She tapped the screen harder, her acrylic nails making sharp clacking sounds in the quiet room. This is a mistake, she muttered, her voice trembling with rising hysteria. Trent, call the bank right now. Call your father. Tell him our accounts are glitching. Trent did not move. He just stared at my laptop screen where the IRS transmission confirmation still glowed neon green. He knows it is not a glitch, Vanessa. I said, my tone perfectly level. I just froze the assets. I told you that 10 minutes ago. Every single dime of the embezzlement money that funded your country club lunches and designer shopping sprees is gone. You are completely broke. Vanessa's head snapped up. Her perfectly contoured face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. She hurled her useless phone across the room. It shattered against the mahogany bookshelf, raining glass onto the floor. You ruined my life, she shrieked, lunging toward me. Trent grabbed her by the waist, holding her back, but she fought against him like a wild animal. You vindictive, jealous little nobody. Do you have any idea what you have done? We have the hospital gala tomorrow night. I am supposed to be hosting the charity silent auction. My cards are declining. How am I supposed to pay the caterers, Maya? How am I supposed to show my face at the club? I watched her thrash against her husband, completely devoid of any sympathy. You are worried about a charity gala when your husband just tried to frame me for a federal crime, I asked, crossing my arms. You are worried about the caterers while Julian is facing 20 years in prison. Vanessa stopped struggling, but her chest heaved as she glared at me with absolute venom. I do not care about Julian, she spat, looking down at him with pure disgust. I care about my reputation. I care about my life. A life you have been trying to destroy since we were teenagers. You have always hated me because I am everything you are not. I am a Spelman graduate. I pledged Alpha Kappa Alpha. I married into the Buckhead elite. I built a flawless brand while you were hiding in your dark basement typing on a keyboard. You are nothing, Maya. You have no network, no pedigree, and no class. You are a community college dropout who got lucky playing with computers. I built a perfect marriage with a man who actually matters. Trent is a third-generation investment banker. We are Atlanta royalty. You are just a bitter, lonely failure trying to drag me down to your pathetic level. You think freezing my credit cards makes you powerful. It just makes you a criminal. My parents were right about you. You are a massive disappointment. You will always be a jealous failure. You have no husband now. You have no family. You are going to end up completely alone and entirely homeless. She spat the word homeless as if it were a disease. My mother Eleanor stood in the corner silently weeping into her hands, making no move to defend me. My father, Bishop Thomas, was slumped in his leather chair, staring blankly at the wall. They were letting Vanessa tear me apart exactly like they had done my entire life. But her words did not sting anymore. They were just hollow, desperate noises from a woman who had built her entire identity on a mountain of toxic debt. I smiled. It was a slow, genuine smile that caused Vanessa Rant to falter. I uncrossed my arms and calmly reached into my black designer tote bag. "You talk a lot about your perfect life, Vanessa," I said, pulling out a thick manila envelope. "You talk about your elite marriage and your flawless brand. But you never talk about the financing. You never talk about the fact that Trent investment firm leveraged your primary residence to cover his margin calls last quarter." Trent head whipped toward me, his eyes wide with sudden terror. "Shut up, Maya," he commanded, his voice cracking. "Do not say another word." Vanessa looked at her husband, her brow furrowed in confusion. "Trent, what is she talking about? What margin calls?" I ignored him and pulled a crisp, heavy document from the envelope. "I did not just buy the church defaulted loans, Vanessa." I explained, my voice echoing clearly in the silent study. "My company acquired a massive portfolio of distressed assets across the entire state. Trent firm was bleeding cash. He defaulted on the secondary mortgage 3 weeks ago. The bank quietly initiated foreclosure proceedings to avoid a public scandal for his wealthy family." I walked slowly toward my sister, holding the document out. She stared at it as if it were a venomous snake refusing to take it. "You are not Atlanta royalty, Vanessa," I said, letting the heavy paper drop onto the marble table right in front of her. "You are broke. You are in millions of dollars of debt. And you do not have a house anymore." Vanessa's hands shook as she finally picked up the document. Her eyes scanned the legal jargon, landing on the official seal at the bottom of the page. I watched the exact moment her reality shattered. She let out a breathless gasp, dropping the paper. The document fluttered to the floor, landing face up. It was a property deed. "I bought the banknote," I stated, looking directly into her panicked eyes. "I am the new legal owner of your foreclosed Buckhead mansion." Vanessa stared at the embossed seal, as if the parchment itself had burst into flames. Her perfectly manicured fingers trembled so violently, she dropped the document back onto the marble table. She clutched her chest, gasping for air in short, shallow bursts. The realization that her sanctuary of wealth and status now belonged to the sister she despised was suffocating her. I did not give her a moment to recover. I reached back into my leather tote bag and withdrew a single sheet of stark white paper. I held it out to her. "This is a formal 30-day eviction notice," I said, my voice slicing through the heavy silence of the study. "You have exactly 1 month to pack your designer wardrobe and vacate my property. If you leave so much as a single scuff mark on the hardwood floors, I will deduct the repair costs from whatever pennies you manage to scrape together in bankruptcy court." Vanessa let out a strangled shriek, batting the paper away. It fluttered to the floor, landing beside Julian, who was still rocking back and forth on the Persian rug. "You cannot do this," Vanessa screamed, her voice echoing off the mahogany walls. "You cannot just steal my house. We are the victims here. Trent, tell her she cannot do this." Trent finally snapped out of his shock. His face, which had been pale with terror just moments before, now flooded with a dark, dangerous crimson. The polished investment banker facade completely evaporated, leaving behind a desperate man clinging to the last shreds of his authority. He stepped over the eviction notice and marched toward me. "You have made a massive mistake, Maya," he snarled, pointing a rigid finger at my face. You think buying a distressed asset gives you power over me? I sit on the board of the City Planning Commission. I play golf with the district attorney. You are a cyber criminal who just admitted to hacking corporate networks and freezing bank accounts. I am going to see you locked in a federal penitentiary for the rest of your natural life. He whipped his phone out of his tailored suit jacket and dialed a number. He did not bother stepping out of the room. He wanted me to hear every word. He wanted to watch my confidence crumble. David, it is. Trent, he barked into the receiver the moment the call connected. I need squad cars at my Buckhead estate immediately. We have an intruder. My sister-in-law has broken into our home and is attempting to extort us. She has openly confessed to committing severe cybercrimes against my financial firm. Yes, I want her arrested for trespassing, digital theft, and corporate espionage. Send your best officers right now. He ended the call and shoved the phone back into his pocket. A cruel, triumphant smirk stretched across his face. The local precinct is 3 miles away, he stated, crossing his arms over his chest. You have about 5 minutes before you are in handcuffs. I hope you wore comfortable shoes, Maya, because processing takes hours. Vanessa immediately straightened her posture, feeding off her husband's arrogant energy. The hyperventilating stopped. She wiped a stray tear from her cheek and glared at me with absolute contempt. You really thought you could outsmart us? She sneered, adjusting her silk blouse. You are so pathetic. You come in here with your little revenge fantasy thinking you can tear down our empire. Trent is untouchable. He knows everyone in this city. They will bury your ridiculous banknote in endless litigation. You will spend the next 10 years drowning in legal fees while you rot in a jail cell. My parents remained entirely mute. My mother was clutching her necklace, staring at the floor. My father simply watched the spectacle, unwilling to intervene, now that Trent had invoked his powerful political connections. They had chosen their side long ago, and they were sticking to it even as the walls of their megachurch empire crumbled around them. I did not argue. I did not flinch. I simply walked around the heavy oak desk and sat down in my father leather chair. I rested my hands on the polished wood and waited. The silence in the room stretched out thick and suffocating. The only sounds were the rain pounding against the stained glass windows and Julian erratic breathing on the floor. 5 minutes later, the distant wail of sirens pierced the stormy night. The sound grew louder, echoing through the neighborhood, until it was right outside the front gates. Flashing red and blue lights painted the walls of the study in harsh strobe patterns. Trent let out a sharp laugh. That is the sound of reality catching up with you, Maya, he gloated. He walked toward the hallway to greet his saviors. Boots pounded against the marble entryway. The front doors swung open, and 3 uniformed police officers marched into the house, followed by 2 men in dark suits. Trent met them in the archway, projecting the image of an outraged homeowner. "Officers, thank God you are here," Trent announced, waving his hand toward me. "This is the woman I called about. She is trespassing and has committed massive financial fraud against my firm. I want her placed under arrest immediately." The lead officer did not look in my direction. He bypassed me, keeping his eyes locked on Trent. He stepped aside, allowing the 2 men to step forward. Trent frowned, his arrogant smile faltering as he registered their federal badges. Mr. Trent Sterling, the taller man, asked, his voice devoid of any emotion. Trent nodded slowly. "Yes, I am Trent Sterling." The man reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick-bound legal document, pressing it directly into Trent's chest. "You are being served with a federal subpoena," the man stated clearly. "The Securities and Exchange Commission has officially launched a full investigation into your firm for rampant market manipulation and institutional fraud." The weekend passed in a blur of frantic phone calls and shredded documents for the Sterling and Wilson families. By Monday morning, the crisp autumnal air of downtown Atlanta felt heavy with impending doom. Trent and Julian hurried through the revolving glass doors of the Sterling Financial Tower. Trent was sweating straight through his bespoke Italian suit, his usually perfect hair slightly disheveled. Julian trailed behind him, looking like a walking corpse. Without his stolen crypto fortune and facing imminent federal indictment, Julian had aged a decade in 48 hours. They were two desperate men walking to the gallows hoping to find a trapdoor. Their only lifeline was a massive emergency merger. Trent had spent the entire weekend begging, pleading, and leveraging every last favor he possessed to secure a meeting with Apex Holdings. Apex was a ruthless global conglomerate known for acquiring distressed financial firms and gutting them for parts. It was a humiliating surrender for Trent, but a necessary one. An 8-figure cash injection from Apex was the only thing standing between him and a federal penitentiary. He needed liquidity to pay off the offshore debts, cover the frozen accounts, and hire the most expensive defense attorneys in the state before the SEC auditors tore his firm completely apart. They stepped into the executive elevator and rode up to the top floor in complete silence. Julian stared at his reflection in the polished steel doors, his hands trembling uncontrollably. He kept checking his phone, hoping for a miracle that was never going to come. Trent just gripped his leather briefcase, his knuckles turning white. He had promised everyone that this deal was a guaranteed success. He had assured his partners, his wife, and his in-laws that Apex would save them all. When they entered the sprawling glass-walled boardroom, Eleanor and Thomas were already waiting. My parents were dressed to the nines, refusing to let impending bankruptcy tarnish their visual brand. My mother wore a pristine Chanel suit and the heavy diamond necklace she had undoubtedly hidden from the bank auditors. My father wore his finest pastoral robes, projecting an aura of divine confidence that completely contrasted with the grim reality of their situation. They were clinging to their delusions of grandeur, treating this corporate rescue mission like a minor inconvenience. "Trent, thank goodness you are here," Eleanor cooed, standing up to brush a non-existent piece of lint from his lapel. She looked around the opulent boardroom with a satisfied nod. "This is all going to be fine. Vanessa told me the Apex buyout will cover the church building fund and the house. You just need to sign the papers and we can put this entire ridiculous weekend behind us." Thomas nodded firmly, resting a hand on Trent's shoulder. "We have prayed on this, son. The Lord provides. You just secure this cash injection and we will deal with Maya insubordination later. I will have church security bar her from the property permanently. She has caused enough damage to this family." Trent swallowed hard, forcing a tight, artificial smile. He did not have the heart or the courage to tell my parents that the SEC had already frozen his personal assets. He did not mention that his firm was bleeding clients by the hour. He just nodded and took his seat at the head of the long mahogany table. "Yes, Thomas. We just need the Apex capital. Everything depends on this meeting going flawlessly. We cannot let them know how desperate we are." At exactly 9 o'clock, the double doors of the boardroom swung open. 5 executives from Apex Holdings marched into the room, taking their seats on the opposite side of the table. They wore sharp, dark suits and carried themselves with the predatory confidence of apex predators entering a wounded animal territory. At the center of the group sat Marcus Vance, the legendary CEO of Apex. Marcus was a man known for his absolute ruthlessness in corporate acquisitions. He opened his laptop without offering a handshake or a pleasantry. "Let us skip the formalities," Trent Marcus began, his voice echoing sharply in the quiet room. "We have reviewed your emergency merger proposal. You are asking for a $60 million buyout and immediate liquidity. You claim your firm is suffering from a temporary cash flow issue due to market volatility." Trent cleared his throat, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead. "Yes, Marcus. We have a robust client portfolio and excellent long-term projections. We just need a temporary bridge to weather the current quarter. Once the capital is injected, we can finalize the merger, and Apex will possess a dominant share of the Atlanta wealth management sector." Marcus leaned back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers. He stared at Trent with cold, unblinking eyes. Julian shifted nervously in his seat, his leg bouncing under the table. Eleanor and Thomas watched with bated breath, their entire megachurch empire hanging on Marcus' next words. "That is a fascinating pitch," Trent Marcus said flatly. "But we both know it is a complete lie. Your firm is not experiencing market volatility. Your firm is the subject of a massive federal investigation. We know the SEC served you a subpoena on Friday night. We know your offshore accounts are frozen. We know your brother-in-law here is implicated in a multi-million-dollar bearer bond theft. Trent's face drained of all color. He opened his mouth to speak, but Marcus held up a hand, silencing him instantly. Apex Holdings does not blindly absorb toxic assets, Marcus continued. We only agree to an acquisition of this nature if our majority shareholder personally approves the risk. This shareholder recently orchestrated a massive buyout of distressed debts in this specific region. They now hold the controlling stake in our acquisition division. If they say we buy you, we buy you. If they say we let you drown, we let you drown. Thomas leaned forward, his pastoral voice full of false charm. Well then, Marcus, please bring this shareholder in. I am sure once they hear our family history and the incredible community value of our enterprise, they will see this is a worthy investment. Marcus did not smile. He simply pressed a button on his smartwatch. The shareholder is already here. The heavy double doors of the boardroom swung open for a second time. The rhythmic click of high heels echoed against the polished marble floor. Trent, Julian, Eleanor, and Thomas all turned their heads toward the entrance, expecting an imposing corporate titan or a foreign billionaire. Instead, they saw me. I stepped into the boardroom wearing a flawless, tailored navy power suit, my hair pulled back in a sharp, professional style. I held a sleek leather portfolio containing the exact details of their financial ruin. I walked straight past my gaping parents and my hyperventilating husband, taking my place at the absolute head of the table, right next to Marcus. Marcus stood up, buttoning his suit jacket, and gestured toward me. Trent, I believe you already know our majority shareholder, he announced. Allow me to formally introduce Maya Wilson, the owner of Apex Acquisitions and the sole decision-maker regarding your financial survival. I placed my portfolio onto the mahogany table, folding my hands and looking directly into Trent, terrified eyes. Good morning, everyone, I said, my voice ringing with absolute authority. Let us talk about your future. The boardroom erupted into absolute pandemonium. Trent shot up from his leather executive chair with such violent force that it tipped backward and crashed onto the polished marble floor. He slammed both of his palms flat against the mahogany table, his face turning an angry, mottled purple. Julian simply stopped breathing, his jaw hanging open as he stared at me like I was an apparition. My mother let out a sharp, offended gasp, pressing her hand against her pearl necklace, while my father looked wildly between Marcus Vance and me, trying to comprehend the sheer impossibility of the situation. This is a sick joke! Trent bellowed, his voice echoing off the glass walls. He jabbed a finger in my direction. Marcus, I came here to negotiate a $60 million corporate buyout with a serious financial institution. I did not come here to be mocked by my community college dropout sister-in-law. Get her out of this room before I call security myself. Marcus did not even blink. He remained perfectly seated, adjusting his tailored cuffs with slow, deliberate movements. You are in no position to issue demands, Trent. You are sitting in an Apex building and Maya is my boss. If she wants you removed, you will be removed. Until then, I suggest you pick up your chair and sit down before you completely humiliate yourself. Trent let out a harsh, disbelieving laugh, pointing a shaking hand at me. Your boss. She fixes routers for a living. She is a low-level IT tech who answers help desk tickets. You are telling me the help desk girl who wears cheap sweaters to family dinners owns the acquisition division of a global conglomerate. This is a setup. You are trying to tank our firm valuation by pulling this ridiculous stunt. Security! He roared, turning toward the heavy double doors. I want this help desk girl removed from the premises right now. I did not wait for the guards to arrive. I unclasped my leather portfolio and pulled out a sleek silver tablet, setting it down gently in front of me. I am not a help desk girl, Trent, I said, my voice cutting through his shouting like a freshly sharpened blade. I am the founder and chief executive officer of Aegis Cyber. The name hit the room like a physical shockwave. Even Trent froze, his mouth snapping shut. Aegis Cyber was not just a tech company. It was a multi-billion-dollar cybersecurity empire that secured the federal power grid, protected global banking infrastructures, and routinely acquired massive financial conglomerates. I built the company from my dining room table while you were busy mocking my community college degree. I continued, leaning forward so he could hear every single syllable. My software protects 50% of the banks on Wall Street. 3 months ago, Aegis Cyber initiated a hostile takeover of Apex Holdings to expand our financial security division. I do not just own your debt, Trent. I own the institution that owns your debt. The boardroom fell dead silent. The kind of absolute suffocating silence that follows a fatal car crash. The ambient hum of the air conditioning suddenly sounded deafening. Julian sank lower into his chair, looking physically ill. Eleanor's face went completely slack. Her eyes darted from my tailored power suit to the terrified expression on Trent's face and then back to me. The reality of my wealth and power was finally breaking through her meticulously crafted delusions. "Oh, Maya." My mother breathed, her voice trembling with sudden artificial warmth. She took a step toward me, her hands clasped together. "You bought the firm to save us. You let us think we were losing everything just to teach us a lesson, but you are actually here to bail out the family. That is so wonderfully generous of you, sweetheart." I looked at the woman who had watched me be humiliated for over 2 decades. The woman who had packed my stolen belongings and authorized my arrest just to protect a church-building fund. "I am not here to bail you out, Eleanor," I stated coldly, stripping away the title of mother. "I am here to liquidate you." Thomas puffed out his chest, trying to summon his booming pastoral authority. "Now see here, Maya," he ordered, gripping the edge of the table. "You are still my daughter. You will speak to your mother with respect. You have proven your point. You have the money. Now you need to sign the merger documents and release the funds to Trent so we can stop this nonsense and get back to our lives." "You really have absolutely no idea what is happening here, do you, Thomas?" I asked, shaking my head in pure disgust. "I am not signing a merger document." I tapped the screen of my tablet, connecting it to the massive digital projector mounted on the ceiling. The 80-inch screen behind Marcus flared to life, illuminating the dark room with bright, stark white light. "I am submitting evidence." The projector displayed a live feed of the internal server directories belonging to Trent Financial Firm. I had bypassed their amateur firewalls days ago. Trent whipped his head around to look at the screen and let out a strangled gasp. Julian covered his face with his hands. "What you are looking at is the raw, unencrypted data stream from your own offshore private ledgers," I announced, tapping my screen again to open a cascading series of transaction logs. "You claimed your firm was suffering from temporary market volatility, Trent. You told your investors the funds were locked in bad tech stocks. But the data tells a completely different story." Rows of highlighted red text scrolled rapidly down the projector screen. Each line represented a wire transfer, moving massive sums of money through ghost corporations. I highlighted a specific cluster of transactions, linking them directly to Julian Church accounts. "This is a direct trail of wire fraud," I explained, my voice echoing relentlessly. "For the past 4 years, Trent has been actively siphoning client funds and funneling them through dummy corporations in the Cayman Islands. He then used Julian's position at the church to clean the cash, disguising the stolen money as anonymous charitable donations. You two did not just mismanage a wealth fund. You orchestrated a massive coordinated money laundering scheme that has defrauded thousands of innocent people." The accusations hung in the heavy boardroom air like a live grenade. Trent frantically pounded the keys of his own laptop, trying to shut down the projector. But my bypass codes had locked him out of his own network. He was trapped in a glass cage of his own, forced to watch the scrolling evidence of his federal crimes. Thomas gripped the edge of the mahogany table so hard his knuckles turned stark white. He looked at Julian, his golden son-in-law, expecting a righteous denial. Julian was practically hyperventilating, his perfectly styled hair now matted with cold sweat. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. The pristine facade of the Sterling family was peeling away, revealing the rot underneath. Marcus Vance simply adjusted his tie, his expression entirely unreadable. He had seen countless corporate empires fall, but rarely with such poetic precision. Before my father could summon the breath to demand an explanation, the heavy frosted glass doors of the boardroom violently swung open. The sudden cracking noise made Eleanor jump out of her seat, clutching her chest. A woman stumbled into the room looking as though she had just been chased through a war zone by wild dogs. It was Chloe, the lead accountant for the megachurch, and Julian, fiercely loyal personal assistant. Her normally immaculate designer dress was wrinkled and torn at the hem. She was clutching an oversized leather tote bag to her chest like a defensive shield. Tears streaked her expensive mascara, leaving dark, jagged smudges across her pale cheeks. She completely ignored the Apex executives, my parents, and Trent. Her panicked, erratic eyes darted around the sprawling room until they locked onto Julian. "Julian, they are at the church!" Chloe gasped, her voice echoing shrilly against the glass walls. She practically threw herself across the room, stopping just short of his chair, her chest heaving with exertion. "Federal agents are swarming the administrative offices right now. They have boxes, Julian. Dozens of boxes. They are seizing the servers, the hard drives, the physical file cabinets, everything. They handed me a federal subpoena right in the lobby and said I am looking at 20 years in a maximum security prison for wire fraud conspiracy. You promised me this was foolproof. You promised me the offshore routing was completely untraceable. You have to call those high-powered corporate lawyers you constantly bragged about. You have to fix this right now before they put me in handcuffs." The silence that followed her hysterical confession was absolute and devastating. Thomas stared at his accountant, his pastoral mask entirely crumbling into an expression of sheer, unadulterated horror. Eleanor clutched her diamond necklace, gasping for air, as if the room had suddenly been drained of oxygen. Julian looked at Chloe as if she were a rabid animal that had just wandered into a five-star restaurant. He saw the Apex executives watching him with predatory interest. He saw the federal prison cell waiting for him. In that split second, the cowardice that had always defined his character took complete control. He stood up abruptly, knocking his heavy leather chair backward onto the marble floor. "I have absolutely no idea what you're talking about, you hysterical woman!" Julian shouted, his voice dripping with desperate venom. He took a deliberate step away from her, pointing an accusing finger directly at her tear-stained face. "Do not try to drag me into your criminal mess. If there is money missing from the church accounts, it is because you stole it. You are the lead accountant. You had sole administrative access to the routing numbers. Thomas, I swear to you, I never authorized any offshore transfers. She must have been embezzling funds for years to fund her lifestyle, and now that the feds have finally caught her, she is trying to frame me to save her own miserable skin." Chloe flinched, physically recoiling as if Julian had struck her across the face. Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. She stared at the man she had idolized, the man she had eagerly broken federal laws for, the man who had promised her a luxurious life once they siphoned enough from the congregation. She watched him straighten his suit jacket and look at Thomas with practiced, innocent outrage. He was sacrificing her without a single second thought. He was going to let her rot in a federal penitentiary so he could maintain his pristine, righteous reputation. The tears streaming down her face abruptly stopped. The blind panic in her eyes hardened into something incredibly sharp and dangerous. "You are throwing me under the bus," Chloe whispered, her voice dropping to a deadly calm octave that sent a chill through the room. "You sat in my living room drinking expensive wine bought with stolen donation money and promised we were in this together forever. Now you are calling me a common thief in front of your board members." Julian scoffed, rolling his eyes and looking toward Trent for backup. "Get this lunatic out of here," he demanded, waving his hand dismissively. "She is clearly having a mental breakdown and making up insane lies. Call building security immediately." Chloe did not scream. She did not cry. She simply let out a low, bitter laugh that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. The sheer magnitude of his betrayal had completely shattered her loyalty. She looked at Julian with absolute profound disgust, then turned her gaze toward me. She had spent years watching my family treat me like an outcast. She knew exactly who held the real power in this room right now. Without another word to Julian, she walked slowly around the long mahogany table until she stood directly beside my chair. She unzipped her oversized leather tote bag. Julian's arrogant sneer vanished instantly. A look of genuine primal terror washed over his face as he realized exactly what she was carrying. Chloe reached deep into the bag and pulled out a thick, weathered black book. It was not a hard drive or a flash drive that could be remotely wiped, corrupted, or encrypted. It was a physical, handwritten ledger. She slammed it down onto the polished wood directly in front of me. The heavy thud echoed like a gunshot through the silent boardroom. He thought he was so smart, keeping the real numbers off the digital grid. Chloe announced, her voice ringing with absolute clarity. That is every single illicit transaction. Every offshore shell company, every fake charity donation, every dime they stole from the congregation over the last 5 years. It has his signature initials next to every single approval. I want full immunity, Maya. Give me legal protection, and this ledger is yours to hand straight to the federal prosecutors. I rested my hand flat over the cracked leather cover of the book. The sheer weight of the physical ledger felt like an anchor securing me to a reality my family had spent decades trying to deny. I looked at Chloe. Her chest was still heaving, her eyes wild with the frantic energy of a cornered animal making its final desperate play. You have my word, I stated, my voice perfectly level. Aegis Cyber retains the best white-collar defense attorneys in the country. They will be waiting for you in the lobby. Go downstairs, do exactly what they tell you, and you will walk away from this untouched. Chloe let out a shuddering breath that sounded like a sob. She did not look back at Julian or my parents. She simply turned on her heel and marched out of the boardroom, leaving the heavy oak doors open behind her. The moment the click of her heels faded down the hallway, my father exploded. He slammed both of his fists onto the mahogany table, rattling the crystal water pitchers. The benevolent, pastoral mask he had worn for 30 years completely evaporated. His face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated wrath, the kind of fury he usually reserved for closed doors and drawn blinds. You will close that book immediately, Maya, he bellowed, his voice booming with the practiced resonance of a megachurch bishop delivering a sermon of fire and brimstone. You are my daughter. You will not sit in the presence of strangers and desecrate the holy sanctuary I built with my own 2 hands. Hand me that ledger right now before you bring the wrath of God down upon this entire family. I did not flinch. I did not avert my gaze. I simply stared at the man who had repeatedly told me my ambitions were an affront to his divine vision for our family. You did not build a sanctuary. Thomas, I replied slowly, tracing the edge of the leather binding with my index finger. You built a financial slaughterhouse, and the only wrath coming down on this family today belongs to the federal government. I flipped the heavy cover open. The pages were yellowed at the edges, filled with Chloe's meticulous microscopic handwriting. Columns and rows of dates, routing numbers, and transaction memos painted a horrifying picture of systemic generational theft. Eleanor practically lunged forward, her manicured fingers clawing at the empty air. Maya, do not do this, she shrieked, her voice cracking with hysteria. We are your blood. You cannot just read private church documents in front of these corporate vultures. Trent stepped around the table, his eyes fixed on the ledger with the desperate intensity of a drowning man spotting a life raft. He reached out to snatch the book, but Marcus Vance stood up abruptly, blocking his path. Marcus did not say a word. He simply leveled a cold, dead stare at Trent that stopped the investment banker dead in his tracks. My father realized physical intimidation was no longer an option. He tried to pivot back to his spiritual authority, pointing a trembling finger at my face. I command you to stop this madness, Thomas ordered, his chest puffing out. That book contains confidential tithe records. It is protected by pastoral privilege. You are reading sacred donations given by faithful parishioners to further the kingdom of heaven. If you read another word, you are committing a spiritual crime. I ignored his pathetic grandstanding. My eyes scanned the first page, tracing a series of massive withdrawals that had occurred just last spring. Sacred donations. I repeated, letting out a harsh, humorless laugh. Is that what we are calling hush money these days? I pressed my finger against a specific entry. Let us look at the kingdom of heaven, Thomas. On April 12th, $85,000 was wired from the Church Orphanage Expansion Fund to a private account in Delaware. I flipped a few pages forward, tracking the corresponding routing numbers. The beneficiary of that account is a woman named Sarah Jenkins. Julian's face went the color of wet ash. He slumped back into his chair, looking as though he might vomit right onto the mahogany table. Sarah Jenkins was your personal assistant before Chloe took over, I stated, looking directly at my brother-in-law. The same assistant who abruptly quit and moved out of state after purchasing a luxury condo in cash. You used the orphanage fund to buy the silence of your mistress, Julian. You stole from homeless children to cover up your infidelity, so my sister would not file for divorce and ruin the perfect family image your brand relies on. My mother gasped, covering her mouth with both hands as she stared at Julian in absolute horror. But Thomas did not stop there, did he? I continued, my voice rising with icy precision. I flipped to the middle of the ledger. Here's a transfer from the youth ministry operational budget. $250,000 sent to an offshore holding company registered in Macau. I looked at Trent, who was now sweating so profusely his shirt collar was soaked. That holding company belongs to an underground sports betting syndicate. You were not just playing golf with the district attorney, Trent. You were placing illegal 7-figure wagers on offshore sports books. When your debts came due and the syndicate threatened to break your legs, my father bailed you out. He drained the youth ministry accounts to pay off your illegal gambling debts, just to ensure a scandal did not tarnish his pristine pastoral legacy. Your entire empire is built on the stolen prayers of working-class people, I said, slamming the book shut. You preach salvation on Sunday while wiring stolen cash to mistresses and loan sharks on Monday. Every single dirty secret is documented right here. You are not a holy man, Thomas. You are a common criminal hiding behind your stained glass window now. My father shrank back into his plush leather chair as if the heavy black ledger had physically struck him. The righteous indignation melted from his face, leaving behind the pale, trembling features of a man who suddenly realized he was going to die in a federal prison. He clutched his chest, gasping for short, shallow breaths, while Eleanor completely abandoned her matriarchal composure and openly wept into her manicured hands. Trent was violently pacing the length of the glass wall, muttering incomprehensibly about offshore accounts and asset relocation. The entire Sterling and Wilson dynasty was disintegrating right in front of my eyes. But Vanessa refused to surrender. She had spent her entire adult life curating an immaculate digital facade. Her entire identity was built on her massive social media, following her lucrative lifestyle sponsorships and her perfectly constructed megachurch princess brand. She watched her husband pacing like a trapped rat and her father suffocating under the weight of his own crimes. Instead of feeling a shred of remorse, my sister went into absolute survival mode. She reached into her designer handbag and pulled out her smartphone, her fingers moving with practiced lightning speed. If you think you can just march in here and destroy my brand, you are completely delusional, Maya, she hissed, backing away from the table and propping her phone against a heavy crystal vase. You are nothing but a jealous, bitter little nobody. You have always been obsessed with tearing me down because Mom and Dad actually loved me, because I actually made something of my life while you hid behind a computer screen. She quickly checked her hair in the dark reflection of the screen before tapping it twice, launching her primary social media platform and going live to her 3 million followers. The transformation was instant and terrifyingly flawless. The vicious, snarling woman vanished in a millisecond, replaced by a tragic, trembling victim. Tears welled in her bright blue eyes, perfectly catching the boardroom lighting. You guys, I need your help right now, Vanessa cried into the camera, her voice breaking with manufactured terror. She hugged her arms around her waist, projecting the ultimate picture of vulnerable innocence. I am trapped in a boardroom with my sister Maya. Please, if anyone is watching, call the authorities. She is having a severe mental breakdown and holding our family hostage. I watched her weave her fictional web, completely fascinated by her sociopathic dedication to the lie. She adjusted her angle slightly to capture the distressed, weeping faces of our parents in the background, without showing the apex executives. Maya has always struggled with severe psychological issues, Vanessa sobbed, wiping a delicate tear from her cheek. She was always the troubled one in the family, the one we had to hide. We tried so hard to get her help, but she refused. Now she has completely snapped. She forged a bunch of fake financial documents and is trying to extort our church ministry for millions of dollars. She is threatening to ruin my husband and my father if we do not pay her ransom. Please pray for us. Trent stopped pacing and stared at his wife, a glimmer of desperate hope flashing in his eyes. He actually believed her pathetic public relations spin might work. He thought her army of loyal followers could bully the narrative, flood the internet with misinformation, and paint me as a deranged extortionist before the federal indictments went public. I simply sighed and opened the command terminal on my silver tablet. Vanessa had always underestimated me. She still thought of me as the quiet scapegoat who accepted her hand-me-downs and swallowed her insults. She forgot that I controlled the very digital infrastructure she was currently relying on to spread her toxic lies. You really should not use an unencrypted public network to broadcast your falsehoods, Vanessa, I said, my fingers flying across the digital keyboard. Within seconds, my Aegis cyber routing software identified her specific phone signal. I bypassed the local network security protocols, completely isolating her device stream from the main server. I did not shut her broadcast down. That would have been entirely too merciful, and it would have allowed her to play the victim of censorship. Instead, I decided to give her 3 million devoted followers a much more entertaining show. What are you doing? Vanessa snapped, her fake tears instantly vanishing as she glared at me over the top of her phone. She reached forward to check the screen, but I had already locked her out of the operating system. Her display went completely unresponsive, freezing her carefully practiced, tragic expression. "Stop touching your tablet," she demanded, her voice rising in genuine panic as she frantically tapped the black glass. "Give me back my feed right now, Maya." I did not look up from my screen. I just hit the final execution key. "Your followers love transparency and authenticity, Vanessa," I stated coldly, leaning back in my chair and folding my arms. "So I am giving them an exclusive behind-the-scenes look at the real you." I routed a highly classified encrypted video file directly into her active live stream, overriding her camera feed entirely. It was high-definition security footage I had pulled from the megachurch hidden basement cameras exactly 3 weeks ago. On the massive boardroom projector, and on millions of smartphone screens across the country, the image of a weeping Vanessa was instantly replaced. The new video showed Vanessa standing in a dark concrete hallway beneath the church sanctuary. She was not crying or praying. She was aggressively backing Julian into a corner, gripping his suit lapels with both hands. Her voice echoed loudly out of her own phone speakers, broadcasting her desperate, pathetic plea to the entire world. "Julian, you have to wire me another 50,000 from the orphanage fund right now," she begged on the security footage, her tone shrill and demanding. "Trent is completely broke because of his gambling, and the bank is threatening to repossess my Mercedes. Just cut the check like you did last time and do not tell my husband." The heavy frosted doors clicked shut behind the departing elite lawyers, leaving Trent completely paralyzed on the imported marble. He dropped to his knees, clutching his head, as the brutal reality of his total disownment finally set in. His powerful parents had permanently erased his existence from their pristine bloodline to shield their legacy from federal scrutiny. The sterile boardroom air was suddenly thick with the stench of ruined men. Julian stood frozen by the projector screen, watching his last lifeline evaporate. The gambling syndicate would soon be coming for Trent, and agents were boxing up Julian's fraudulent life downstairs. He had absolutely nothing left to lose in this room. Julian straightened his ruined tie and let out a dry, raspy chuckle. He stepped over Trent's sobbing form and walked directly toward my side of the mahogany table. The desperate panic in his eyes was replaced by the toxic gleam of a cornered predator making a final suicidal lunge. He slammed his palms flat onto the table, leaning in close. "You really think you hold all the cards here, Maya?" Julian sneered, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "You think a few bank logs and a jilted accountant give you absolute victory? You forgot who ran the administrative wing of this family for the last decade. I did not just manage the offshore accounts, I managed the dirty laundry." Thomas shot up his face, draining of color. "Julian, keep your mouth shut," Thomas ordered, his pastoral authority replaced by naked terror. "I am done keeping your secrets," Bishop Julian barked, never breaking eye contact with me. "If I am going down, I am taking this holy empire with me." 2 years ago, when Thomas was away, I needed a specific routing number. I bypassed the biometric lock on his private wall safe. I found the offshore accounts, but I also found a hidden compartment. It contained sealed medical records, private investigator logs, and hush money payoffs. Eleanor let out a strangled shriek and covered her ears. "Julian, please," she begged, her voice trembling with panic. "Shut up, Eleanor!" Julian snapped, enjoying the sudden surge of power. He turned his predatory gaze back to me. "Did you ever wonder why you were always the outcast, Maya? Why your parents looked at you like a piece of garbage while throwing money at Vanessa? It was not because you were a disappointment. It was because you are a walking reminder of your mother's sins. You are not a Sterling. You are a bastard." The room fell into a hush. Even Trent stopped whimpering, looking up from the floor in shock. Marcus Vance raised a single eyebrow, adjusting his posture in his leather chair. I simply kept my hands folded, resting them on the surface of the table. "Go on, Julian," I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "Your righteous mother had an affair 35 years ago," Julian declared, his voice ringing with malice. "She slept with a venture capitalist from New York. Thomas found out, but a divorce would have ruined his pastoral career and cost him the church. So he forced Eleanor to bury the truth. He claimed you as his own to save the brand, but he despised you from the moment you took your first breath. I have the copies of the DNA tests, Maya. I have the signed non-disclosure agreements. If you do not hand over that ledger and grant me full immunity, I will send the entire file to every major news outlet. I will expose your mother as an adulterer." Eleanor collapsed forward onto the table, burying her face in her arms. Sobs racked her fragile frame as her reality disintegrated. "It is true," she wailed, her voice muffled by the polished wood. "I was so young and Thomas was always working. I made a terrible mistake. I tried to love you, Maya, I really did, but every time Thomas looked at you, he saw my betrayal. We had to protect the church." She reached out a trembling hand toward me, seeking maternal absolution. I did not move to comfort her. Julian stood tall, a sickening smirk spreading across his face. He believed he had won. He expected me to crumble under the weight of a 30-year-old secret. Instead, I let out a soft laugh. I picked up my silver tablet and locked the screen. Julian's smirk faltered. "You really are an amateur, Julian," I said, shaking my head in mild amusement. "You broke into a safe, found a few dusty folders, and thought you uncovered the Holy Grail. Did you honestly believe a cybersecurity architect who routinely bypasses encrypted mainframes would not have investigated her family history?" I stood up, smoothing the front of my tailored suit. "I have known Thomas was not my biological father since I was 16 years old," I announced, my voice carrying absolute crystalline authority. "I ran my genetic sequencing through an independent laboratory. I knew exactly who my real father was. His name was Arthur Vance, and he was a New York venture capitalist." Eleanor had snapped up, her face frozen in shock. Thomas gripped his chest. "When Arthur passed away 5 years ago, he left behind a private blind trust designated for his only biological child," I explained, walking slowly toward Julian. "He knew Thomas and Eleanor would try to seize the money to fund their miserable church, so he locked it behind complex corporate shell structures. He left me $25 million in seed capital." Julian's jaw dropped, his face turning a shade of gray. "That $25 million is what I used to build Aegis Cyber," I whispered, stopping mere inches from Julian's face. "My biological father funded the very empire that just bought your debt and liquidated your fraudulent life. Your blackmail is worthless, Julian. The press already knows Arthur is my father because I claimed my inheritance years ago. You brought a water pistol to a nuclear war." Julian stared at me with an expression of complete cognitive failure. His mouth hung open, but the manipulative words that had always saved him were completely gone. The realization that my biological father's wealth was the very instrument dismantling his life short-circuited his brain. Marcus Vance leaned forward, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. Arthur was my uncle. Marcus stated, his voice a low, terrifying rumble that commanded the entire boardroom. He was a brilliant man who despised parasites. When Maya reached out to Apex, she did not just bring an airtight financial portfolio. She brought family. We have been waiting a very long time to carve the rot out of this city. Julian staggered backward, bumping into the edge of the heavy mahogany table as his legs finally gave out. He had attempted to use my own bloodline against me, unaware that this same bloodline was financing his total destruction. The heavy silence in the executive suite was suddenly pierced by a sound that made my mother flinch. It started as a distant wail echoing up from the downtown streets below, multiplying and growing louder by the second. The wail transformed into a chorus of piercing sirens. Red and blue lights began to reflect against the floor-to-ceiling glass windows, casting an eerie strobe-like glow over the panicked faces of my family. The Sterling dynasty was built on the illusion of untouchable grace. They believed their wealth and massive megachurch congregations shielded them from the consequences that applied to ordinary people. They were about to learn that federal law did not care about their polished Sunday sermons. Shouting erupted from the hallway outside the frosted glass doors. We could hear the heavy thud of tactical boots marching across the carpeted corridors of the executive wing. Chloe backed away from the table, clutching her distressed leather tote bag against her chest, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and vindicated relief. She had handed over the physical ledger just in time to secure her immunity deal. Julian finally snapped out of his catatonic state. He lunged toward me, his hands outstretched in a pathetic gesture of surrender. "Maya, please," he begged, his voice cracking into a high-pitched whine. "We can fix this. I can transfer the remaining offshore funds directly into your Aegis accounts right now. I can give you control of the entire holding company. Just call them off." I looked at the man who had tormented me, manipulated my sister, and stolen millions from desperate people seeking spiritual guidance. "I do not negotiate with criminals, Julian," I replied coldly, tapping a final command into my tablet. The heavy double doors of the boardroom were violently thrown open, shattering against the drywall. A swarm of federal agents poured into the room, their dark tactical gear contrasting sharply with the pristine corporate decor. The lead FBI agent, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a voice like grinding gravel, held up a thick stack of warrants. "Federal Bureau of Investigation," he barked, his voice commanding absolute compliance. "Nobody move a single muscle." The room erupted into absolute chaos. Julian tried to scramble backwards, slipping on the polished marble and crashing hard onto his side. Two agents were on him in a fraction of a second. They grabbed him by the lapels of his custom Italian suit and hoisted him violently into the air. He was slammed face first onto the polished mahogany boardroom table. The sickening thud of his impact rattled the crystal water glasses. "You have the right to remain silent," an agent shouted, twisting Julian's arms behind his back. The sharp click of heavy steel handcuffs locking around his wrists echoed through the room. Julian sobbed openly, his face pressed against the digital projections of his own financial crimes. Trent tried to crawl away toward the corner, his elite upbringing utterly useless against federal authority. An agent hauled him up by his collar, dragging him effortlessly across the floor. He was slammed down onto the table right next to Julian, his face pale and contorted with fear. The warrant specifically cited the unassailable digital evidence packets provided by Aegis Cyber, detailing every single fraudulent wire transfer and stolen donation. The undeniable proof of their massive embezzlement scheme was currently sitting in the hands of the Justice Department. As the armed federal agents rapidly swarmed the room, loudly reading Miranda rights, I noticed a very subtle movement near the back of the suite. Thomas and Eleanor were slowly backing away, using the loud commotion as a convenient shield. The righteous megachurch patriarch had completely abandoned his son-in-law. He grabbed my mother's arm, pulling her toward the private executive elevator, hidden behind a decorative wooden panel. They honestly thought they could simply walk away completely untouched. They believed they could slip out the back door and hide behind their expensive criminal defense attorneys. They intended to play the role of the innocent religious leaders who had absolutely no idea what their wicked subordinates were secretly doing downstairs. I watched them reach the polished elevator alcove, their breathing heavily ragged, their anxious eyes darting continuously toward the armed FBI agents who were now actively hauling a loudly weeping Julian to his feet. Thomas reached out with a trembling hand and confidently pressed the call button. He let out a shaky sigh of immense relief as the floor indicator chimed. He actually believed he had fully escaped the fallout. He thought his holy empire would survive this absolute devastation. The heavy steel doors of the private elevator slid open with a soft ping. Thomas and Eleanor stepped forward, desperate to quickly enter the safety of the metal box. They stopped dead in their tracks. The elevator was not empty. Standing inside, shoulder to shoulder, were four stern-faced agents wearing dark windbreakers, bearing the bright yellow letters of the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. The lead agent stepped out, blocking their only exit, holding a massive stack of sealed indictments detailing decades of tax evasion. The federal agents did not hesitate. They slapped heavy steel cuffs onto Thomas and Eleanor before the pristine elevator doors could even slide shut. 6 weeks later, the polished marble floors and panoramic skyline views of the Apex boardroom had been entirely replaced by the cold, sterile fluorescent lighting of a federal district courthouse. The Sterling family dynasty was completely unrecognizable. They sat huddled together at the defense table, stripped of their tailored designer suits and diamond tennis bracelets. Thomas wore a rumpled khaki jumpsuit, his once powerful pastoral posture collapsing into the hollow hunch of a defeated old man. Eleanor sat beside him, trembling violently, without her expensive makeup, her manicured nails bitten down to the quick. Trent and Julian flanked them, looking like cornered rats trapped in a nightmare they could no longer manipulate. The sheer scale of their arrogance had been their ultimate downfall. Because I had systematically locked down the Apex routing protocols, and the FBI had simultaneously frozen every single domestic and offshore account tied to the megachurch, my family found themselves instantly destitute. The team of elite, high-powered corporate defense attorneys Trent parents had brought to the boardroom had vanished the exact millisecond they realized there was no clean money left to pay their exorbitant retainer fees. Now the great, untouchable Sterling family was forced to rely on a pair of visibly exhausted, severely overworked public defenders. I sat quietly in the first row of the gallery, wearing a sharply tailored charcoal suit. Vanessa sat 3 rows behind me, glaring daggers completely untouched by the criminal indictments, but entirely bankrupted by the asset seizures. The lead public defender, a frazzled man with a perpetually sweating brow, stood up to address the court for the bail hearing. He knew the forensic accounting evidence against his clients was an absolute mountain of concrete federal proof. He had exactly one desperate card left to play. He needed to entirely discredit the source of the data. Your Honor? The defense attorney began, his voice echoing nervously through the cavernous courtroom. We implore the court to consider the extremely questionable origins of the digital evidence presented in these indictments. The prosecution is relying almost entirely on data packets supplied by Aegis Cyber. We argue that the CEO, Maya Sterling, has a deeply documented history of familial instability and deep-seated vindictive jealousy. He stepped out from behind the heavy wooden defense table, pointing a shaking finger directly at me. Thomas and Eleanor immediately sat up straighter, clinging desperately to this fabricated narrative. My clients are pillars of the religious and business community, the attorney declared, his voice rising in an attempt to project a confidence he clearly lacked. Maya Sterling is an estranged, illegitimate child who harbored a toxic, lifelong grudge against her pious family. She is not a benevolent whistleblower. She is a dangerous, highly sophisticated hacker who utilized her massive, recently inherited venture capital wealth to engineer a hostile digital takeover. We assert that she maliciously fabricated the offshore routing numbers, manipulated the megachurch server logs, and planted false financial records to frame her innocent parents and brothers-in-law out of pure spite. Julian nodded aggressively beside Trent, muttering his agreement while trying to catch the judge's eye. The defense attorney pushed his luck even further. He leaned heavily on the wooden podium, wiping sweat from his forehead. Furthermore, Your Honor, we believe the physical ledger provided by the accountant Chloe was completely manufactured. We suspect Maya blackmailed the accountant using her vast cyber resources to terrorize the woman into committing perjury. This entire federal case is nothing more than the unstable revenge fantasy of a bitter outcast who weaponized a cybersecurity firm to destroy her bloodline. The audacity of the lie was impressive. They were standing in a federal courtroom facing decades of prison time, and they were still trying to cast me as the deranged black sheep. I did not react. I simply maintained my calm, unreadable expression, keeping my hands folded neatly in my lap. I knew the federal prosecutor did not even need to stand up to object. The presiding judge, a 30-year veteran of the federal bench specializing strictly in complex corporate fraud, possessed a notoriously lethal intolerance for courtroom theatrics. The judge slowly lowered his reading glasses, peering over the thick rims, with an expression of absolute freezing contempt. He picked up his heavy wooden gavel and brought it down with a deafening crack that echoed like a cannon shot, silencing the murmuring gallery instantly. "Counselor, you will cease this absurd charade immediately," the judge commanded, his voice dripping with venomous authority. "You are standing in a federal courtroom, not a tabloid television studio. Do you honestly believe the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Internal Revenue Service, and 3 independent forensic auditing firms simply took a digital file at face value?" The judge picked up a stack of reports, dropping them heavily onto his elevated bench. "Every single byte of data provided by Aegis Cyber has been verified and authenticated by Federal Cyber Command. The physical ledger matches the seized bank records down to the penny. Do not waste another second of this court time slandering the woman who exposed one of the most prolific charity extortion rings in the history of this district. Given the overwhelming flight risk associated with these defendants' proven offshore connections, an extensive document tampering bail is unequivocally denied for all 4 criminal defendants." Eleanor let out a strangled wail as Marshall stepped forward. The utter finality of his words struck the defense table like a physical blow. Julian stared blankly at the floor while Thomas finally buried his face in his trembling hands. Their long reign of untouchable wealth had officially reached its end. The judge adjusted his glasses, looking directly at me. "It is the final ruling of this court that Maya Sterling is formally appointed as the legal conservator of the bankrupt church and liquidator of Trent's seized corporate assets." 6 months after the federal judge sealed their fate, the Sterling empire was unceremoniously laid bare beneath the blinding chandeliers of the Buckhead Estate auction house. The sprawling venue was packed shoulder to shoulder with the absolute elite of Atlanta high society. These were the exact same politicians, megachurch patrons, and corporate titans who used to kiss my parents' rings at exclusive charity galas. Now they were hovering like vultures over a fresh carcass, eager to scavenge the designer remnants of a disgraced dynasty. The atmosphere buzzed with a toxic mix of morbid curiosity and ruthless opportunism. The auctioneer's rapid-fire cadence echoed through the grand hall as he ruthlessly dismantled decades of hoarded wealth. Trent customized Italian sports cars went first. I watched from my private balcony as his beloved matte black Ferrari, the one he bought using stolen orphanage funds, triggered a vicious bidding war between 2 rival hedge fund managers. It sold for a fraction of its value. Down on the main floor, Trent stood perfectly still, his jaw clenched so tightly I thought his teeth might shatter. Eleanor was faring much worse. Her pristine collection of chinchilla and mink furs was dragged onto the stage, draped over cheap plastic mannequins. She wept openly into a crumpled tissue as wealthy socialites she once considered inferior snatched up her prized garments for pennies on the dollar. The sheer indignity of watching her meticulously crafted high society image being sold off piecemeal was completely breaking her mind. But the main event was always going to be Vanessa. She had arrived wearing a simple unbranded black dress, entirely stripped of the ostentatious luxury that used to define her very existence. The auction assistants began wheeling out massive industrial racks, heavily burdened with her custom Parisian couture. Hundreds of silk gowns, limited edition handbags, and diamond-encrusted stilettos were auctioned off in rapid succession. Her massive social media following had evaporated overnight, leaving her with nothing but the crushing reality of her absolute bankruptcy. She stood near the back row, flanked by her disgraced parents, looking like a ghost haunting her own funeral. Every time the auctioneer slammed his wooden gavel down, signaling another piece of her identity being handed over to a stranger, she flinched violently. Then the room fell completely silent. The heavy velvet curtains on the main stage parted, revealing a reinforced glass display case flanked by two armed security guards. Resting on a black velvet cushion under a blazing spotlight was the crown jewel of the Sterling estate. It was Vanessa custom-crafted diamond and platinum tiara. She had explicitly commissioned the piece for her notoriously lavish 30th birthday bash, claiming it was a divine symbol of her spiritual royalty within the megachurch. The sheer arrogance of the piece had always disgusted me, but to Vanessa, it was the ultimate physical manifestation of her golden child status. Seeing it trapped in a glass cage, up for public consumption, finally broke the last remaining shred of her fragile composure. Vanessa let out a loud, ragged sob that cut through the silent auction hall. She pushed her way to the front of the crowd, pressing her hands against the velvet security rope. "Please," she begged, her voice cracking as she looked wildly around the room at the sea of unforgiving faces. "Not the crown. It was blessed by my father. It is a sacred family heirloom. You cannot just sell it." Her desperate plea was met with icy indifference. The Atlanta black elite simply averted their eyes or whispered behind their numbered bidding paddles. Nobody cared about the tears of a fallen megachurch princess who built her lucrative lifestyle brand on stolen congregation money. The auctioneer cleared his throat, completely ignoring her theatrical display, and opened the bidding at a staggering $200,000. The numbers skyrocketed instantly. A wealthy real estate developer from Alpharetta raised his paddle. A prominent plastic surgeon matched it effortlessly. The price quickly climbed to $300,000, then $400,000. Vanessa stood frozen, her chest heaving as she watched the numbers climb, entirely powerless to stop the ultimate desecration of her most prized possession. She looked up toward the exclusive VIP balconies, her eyes scanning the shadowed figures until they locked directly onto me. Even from 100 feet away, I could see the naked, terrified pleading in her bright blue eyes. She desperately wanted me to stop it. She wanted the outcast sister she had tormented for decades to swoop in and rescue her precious status symbol. I calmly picked up my solid gold bidding paddle. $500,000, my voice rang out, cutting over the chaotic murmurs of the elite crowd. The auction house gasped collectively, pivoting their heads to look up at my balcony. The plastic surgeon immediately lowered his paddle, recognizing the unmistakable tone of a woman who possessed infinite capital and zero hesitation. The auctioneer scanned the room, searching for another challenger, but the sheer finality of my bid hung over the vast crowd like a heavy iron blanket. Going once, he called out, his voice echoing. Going twice. He slammed the wooden gavel down onto the podium. Sold to Maya Sterling. Vanessa let out a massive, trembling breath of pure relief. A weak, grateful smile actually broke across her tear-stained face. She genuinely believed her bloodline had finally won out. She thought I had spent $500,000 to preserve the family dignity, to hand her back the sparkling crown she so desperately craved. She took a hopeful step toward the center aisle, wiping her mascara-stained cheeks, anticipating a grand sisterly reunion. I did not break eye contact with her as I leaned forward, resting my arms on the balcony railing. I picked up the silver microphone connected to the main house speakers. "Mr. Auctioneer," I announced, my voice echoing coldly across the silent hall. Please package the tiara immediately and transfer it directly to the Safe Haven charity for runaway teens. The torrential downpour battered the reinforced glass of my triplex penthouse. From the 65th floor, the city of Atlanta was nothing more than a glittering grid of brake lights and blurred street lamps. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, holding a simple glass of sparkling water, enjoying the absolute pristine silence of my newly acquired fortress. The Aegis Cyber Executive Residence was a marvel of modern architecture and biometric security. No one entered the building without a retinal scan and a pre-approved digital clearance code. The plush, temperature-controlled environment was a stark contrast to the miserable reality currently unfolding on the streets below. My secure tablet vibrated softly on the massive black marble kitchen island, breaking the quiet tranquility of the evening. The caller ID displayed the front desk's security station. I tapped the screen to answer, expecting a routine update from my night shift detail. Instead, the grim voice of Marcus Vance, former Special Forces operator and my newly appointed head of security, filled the room. "We have a situation in the main lobby," Marcus stated, his tone completely devoid of emotion. Two unauthorized females bypassed the outer gate by tailgating a delivery truck. They are currently refusing to leave the reception area and are demanding immediate access to your private elevator. They claim to be your immediate family. I set my glass down on the counter and swiped my tablet to open the live closed-circuit television feeds. The ultra-high-definition cameras positioned around the grand marble lobby provided a crystal-clear view of the trespassers. I stared at the screen, completely mesmerized by the pathetic spectacle unfolding on my digital display. Standing dripping wet on the imported Italian tile were Eleanor and Vanessa. The great matriarch of the Sterling Empire and her golden child had been reduced to absolute ruins. They looked like drowned rats. Eleanor was wearing a cheap plastic poncho over a faded tracksuit, her once immaculate blonde hair plastered to her skull in stringy graying clumps. She was clutching a single garbage bag, stuffed with what appeared to be her remaining worldly possessions. Vanessa stood shivering beside her, completely stripped of the arrogant glamour that had defined her entire existence. Her bare feet were shoved into soggy canvas sneakers, and her face was heavily streaked with running mascara. The federal asset seizure had been utterly merciless, stripping them of their bank accounts, their offshore safety nets, and their massive portfolio of luxury real estate. Thomas and Trent were currently rotting in a federal holding facility awaiting trial, and the women had clearly exhausted whatever meager goodwill they had left with their former high society friends. Nobody in their elite social circle wanted anything to do with the toxic radioactive fallout of the Sterling criminal enterprise. I watched through this camera as Marcus stood like an immovable concrete wall between them and the secure elevator banks. Eleanor was gesturing wildly, her face contorted in a desperate panic. I tapped the audio icon, unmuting the lobby feed. "You have to let us up!" Eleanor wailed, her voice cracking pitifully. "Tell Maya her mother is down here. We have absolutely nowhere else to go. We have been sleeping in a bus station terminal for 3 days. Please, you have to call her. She will want to see us." Vanessa stepped forward, shivering violently in her damp clothes. She looked up directly at the security camera in the corner of the ceiling, her eyes wide and terrified. She knew I was watching. "Maya, please," she begged, wrapping her arms around her chest to ward off the freezing air conditioning. "We are so sorry. We were wrong about Julian. We were wrong about everything. Just let us upstairs. We are freezing." They were truly putting on a masterclass in desperate manipulation. For over 3 decades, they had systematically destroyed my self-worth, completely alienated me from family events, and happily spent the stolen millions that Thomas funneled into their vanity projects. Now that their fraudulent empire had been entirely liquidated, they suddenly remembered my existence. They wanted to crawl into the warm, safe haven I had built with my own hands. Eleanor pushed past Marcus, looking directly into the camera lens. "Maya, you are a Christian woman," she cried out, clasping her hands together in a theatrical display of holy prayer. "You know the scriptures. You know the power of forgiveness. We are your blood. We are your family. You cannot just leave your own flesh and blood to die on the streets. Jesus teaches us to love our enemies and harbor our kin. We are begging you for mercy. I stared at the screen, feeling absolutely nothing for the two strangers shivering in my lobby. The word family sounded utterly poisonous coming from their lips. They had never treated me as a daughter or a sister. I was always the scapegoat, the convenient punching bag they used to elevate their own twisted sense of superiority. They did not want forgiveness. They simply wanted a free luxury suite and a blank check to restart their parasitic lifestyle. I picked up my tablet and pressed the intercom button, transmitting my voice directly to Marcus' earpiece. Marcus, I instructed, my voice calm and perfectly steady. You will not permit them access to the elevators under any circumstances. However, you may give them the envelope I prepared earlier today for this exact scenario. I watched the live feed as Marcus nodded slightly, acknowledging the command. He reached into the inner pocket of his tailored security suit and produced a crisp white envelope. He stepped forward, holding it out to Eleanor. She snatched it from his hands instantly, her eyes lighting up with frantic hope. She clearly believed I had caved to her emotional blackmail. She expected a stack of $100 bills or the keys to a luxury hotel suite. She ripped the envelope open with shaking fingers. Vanessa crowded in close, eagerly peering over her shoulder. The camera captured the exact moment their fragile hope was completely obliterated. Eleanor slowly pulled out a single crisp $20 bill. Tucked neatly behind the currency were two sharply folded paper documents. They were standard entry-level job applications for a local fast food franchise. Marcus crossed his arms over his chest. Ms. Sterling suggests you use the funds to purchase 2 hot meals, he stated, his voice echoing coldly across the empty marble lobby. She also suggests you fill out those applications immediately. You have exactly 30 seconds to vacate these premises before I call the local authorities and have you arrested for criminal trespassing. The digital feed cut out the exact second Marcus escorted them through the revolving glass doors and out into the torrential downpour. I did not watch them walk away into the flooded Atlanta streets. I simply locked the screen of my tablet and poured the rest of my sparkling water down the sink. That single crisp $20 bill was the absolute last financial contribution the Sterling family would ever receive from me. The following morning, I finalized the absolute legal severance. I signed the last towering stack of conservatorship documents, formally dissolving the bankrupt megachurch and permanently liquidating the final remnants of Trent and Julian fraudulent shell companies. I officially petitioned the federal court to completely sever all familial legal ties, permanently removing the Sterling name from my identity and my corporate holdings. I was no longer the unwanted outcast of a deeply corrupt religious dynasty. I was the architect of my own empire and the executioner of theirs. 6 months later, the suffocating humidity of Atlanta was nothing more than a distant memory. The cool, salty breeze of the Pacific Ocean washed over the sprawling teak deck of my new multi-million-dollar Malibu beach house. I stood near the edge of the heavy glass balcony, resting my hands on the polished steel railing as the California sun began its slow, dramatic descent into the water. The sky was a brilliant canvas of crushed tangerine and deep violet. My sanctuary was built directly into the side of a jagged cliff, offering absolute impenetrable privacy and an uninterrupted panoramic view of the endless ocean horizon. Inside the massive minimalist house, there were no fake smiles, no judgmental whispers, and absolutely no religious hypocrisy. There was only the quiet, rhythmic hum of the ocean waves and the profound, weightless sensation of total independence. I walked over to the sunken outdoor lounge area and picked up a heavy crystal glass filled with a rare vintage Cabernet. I took a slow sip, letting the rich, dark flavor settle as I leaned back against the plush white cushions. The Aegis Cyber Global headquarters in San Francisco was currently thriving beyond my most ambitious financial projections. The tech industry had recognized the sheer scale of the digital takedown I had engineered against the apex predators of Atlanta. We had quickly secured massive government defense contracts and international corporate security partnerships, essentially tripling the net worth of my holding company in a matter of months. I had taken the shattered, neglected pieces of my childhood and forged them into a weapon that shielded the innocent. The charity for runaway teens had already used the funds from Vanessa auctioned Diamond Tiara to build a state-of-the-art shelter and education center. Everything I had touched since shedding the toxic weight of my biological family had flourished. A sharp mechanical buzz shattered the rhythmic crashing of the waves below. My personal secure smartphone illuminated on the glass coffee table. I rarely received notifications on this specific encrypted device, and the caller ID display showed an unfamiliar generic federal routing number. I picked up the phone and tapped the screen. An automated robotic voice filled the quiet evening air. You have a prepaid secure message from an inmate at the United States Federal Penitentiary in Atlanta, Georgia. To accept and read the secure text transmission, press 1. I raised a single eyebrow and pressed the glowing number on my screen. The automated system clicked over immediately, opening a digitized text portal utilized by the federal prison system. The message was from Julian. It was poorly typed and frantically formatted, reeking of the desperate, panicked energy of a man completely stripped of his arrogant charm and high society armor. Maya, please, the message read. I know you hate me, but I have absolutely nothing left in this world. The public defenders completely botched the sentencing hearing. Thomas and Trent threw me under the bus to get reduced time, and the judge gave me the maximum penalty. The general prison population knows I am a former police officer who stole millions from a church congregation. It is an absolute nightmare in here. I need funds for the commissary just for basic physical protection. I need you to hire a real appellate lawyer to get me out of this cell. You have millions of dollars. You can easily afford to help me. I am begging you on my bare knees, do not let me die in here. I read the pathetic block of text twice, taking in the sheer audacity of his request. A year ago, a message exactly like this might have triggered a sharp spike of anxiety or a lingering sense of unearned familial guilt. I might have questioned whether ignoring him made me as ruthless and cold as the people who raised me. But standing on that beautiful balcony with the cool ocean breeze lifting my hair, I felt absolutely nothing but a deep, crystalline peace. Julian was a grown man who had made a lucrative career out of exploiting the vulnerable and covering up the sins of a corrupt empire. He had actively participated in my emotional torture and tried to blackmail me with the stolen identity of my biological father. He had enthusiastically dug his own grave, and now he was demanding that I pay for the headstone. A genuine warm smile spread across my face, reaching all the way to my eyes. I tapped the reply box on the prison communication portal. I did not type out a long, vindictive paragraph detailing his failures. I did not waste my breath explaining why he completely deserved his brutal fate or gloating about my new multi-million-dollar beach house. I simply typed 2 words. Try Uber. I hit send. Without waiting for a delivery confirmation, I navigated straight to the security settings and permanently blocked the federal routing address. I completely shut down the device holding the power button until the bright screen faded to absolute black. I tossed the silenced phone onto the cushion beside me and picked up my wine glass. I turned my gaze back out toward the vast, endless expanse of the Pacific Ocean. The sun finally dipped below the waterline, leaving a stunning trail of glowing embers across the evening tide. The Sterling family was officially a closed chapter, and for the very first time in my entire life, I was completely and utterly at peace.